Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Crow Country on PS5. Christ almighty, but players and pundits are sure all up in between the ass cheeks of independent game makers these days, almost like it's fashionable or something. Joking aside, the indie scene seems to be providing fertile ground for games and ideas no AAA studio would touch with a 1,000-foot pole or a Wall Street bank vault full of cocaine proceeds. And while, for me, the jury is still out on the quality and depth of what these small team or one-person projects can produce, maybe just because I don't like fun, or maybe because I've been around the block a few times and I know what a fucking trend looks like by now. If nothing else, we do have some very positive examples of letting small teams play with concepts and see what they get. Let's get into that with 2024's Crow Country. But before I go on, this episode is brought to you by the patrons of Deleted Saves. If you would like to join their illustrious ranks, please go to patreon.com and look for Deleted Saves podcast. My patrons are a small but dedicated bunch, and I thank them and value them greatly. I'm sure they would like a few more folks to commiserate with, too. Don't worry, gang. I'll shout you out at the end of the show, like I always do. Crow Country, right off the top, utilizes the growing popularity of the PS1 era D-Make. In this case, looking an awful lot like the original Final Fantasy VII sprites and detailed backgrounds, despite it having not a damn thing to do with that title. Crow Country is a survival horror title, and while many have said it's a cutie pie version of Resident Evil, I would argue that it has a lot more in common with the very first Silent Hill in pacing, use of weapons, and sometimes obscure puzzles, and monster interactivity. In either case, using either one of those august titles as reference point for this title just goes to show the love and quality SFB Games Limited, the developer of this title, poured into this. SFB were founded by two brothers who started out doing Newgrounds Flash games. Christ, there's a fucking callback to the old times. But have since grown into a small team making small games. The game begins with our main protagonist, FBI agent Mara Forrest. And don't you forget that, if anyone asks. And takes place in the year 1990. Players should recall that for a couple of puzzles later in the game. If you are worried the game is going to play like a title from 1990, rest assured that there are modern gaming comforts here, so it shouldn't deter you. Mara is driving up to a theme park outside Atlanta, Georgia named Crow Country, title drop, in a busted 85 Ford Fiesta, a real FBI quality vehicle here. Crow Country is even stated as being more of a local affair, knowingly unable to compete with the scope and scale of certain theme parks over the Florida state line. But that hardly stopped founder Edward Crow, a private financier and apparently very wealthy man. The park is closed down due to an accident a few years earlier, in which a young woman was attacked by some sort of animal in a restricted section of the park, and it got out to the press. And Crow himself has since disappeared. Mara is here to talk to Crow, armed with a pistol, but just talk, honest. She's an agent after all, she swears. Anyway, she is not attacked at first. The first 10 to 15 minutes of the game, depending on how thorough you are, is just walking up the park's main drag, finding locked doors and gates that will need keys and crank handles to bypass. Crow Country is not a big place, encompassing a main drag, Fairyland, Haunted Hill, Neptune's Kingdom, or some such, various back rooms and hallways, and a few hidden areas and offices. There was supposed to be some sort of future land in progress of being built, but after the accident it was halted altogether. Quickly Mara will come across a dude who is hurt, having broken into the park by another way, and is here trying to take pictures of the supposed ghosts and monsters the locals believe call the abandoned park home. Mara helps him to her car and returns to the park. It is around this time she discovers a fallen banner on the ground with the numbers 2106 on it, and literally none of the numerical puzzle pads have the number 0 on it. Also keep note of that. After wandering into a back hallway and finally getting attacked by some of the guests, the name for the monsters in this game, she discovers an employee lounge and the save system, which is staring into a fire, be it a fireplace, a fire illusion, a burning trash barrel, or the like. The guests are usually stumbling, bumbling, bloody creatures who take their time to wander over to attack. But they do come in a few variations, such as Flesh Puddle, Small Blob, Spiky Explosive Man, Giant Skeleton, or even larger Flesh Puddle. What Mara soon uncovers is that somehow a Brazilian gold mine is tied to the plot and history of Crow Country. What in fuck, you may be asking, does a gold mine in Para, Brazil have to do with a local defunct Atlanta theme park 5,000 miles away? Yes, I looked that up. Turns out quite a lot, but not in the way you think. The gold is being shipped to Brazil, not from Brazil. You see, deep under Crow Country, a gold mine has been discovered, and to keep the cops and federal agents off of Crow's back, he had one of his flunkies find a mine that had run dry and ship the gold to it, stuffed back in balls of dirt and rock, to keep the heat off in a country where no one will ask questions. Unfortunately, the Brazilian authorities also start asking questions. So said flunky, named Marvin, is back looking for Crow too, to seek revenge. Mara will run into a few folks as she travels the small park. Crow's daughter Natalie, a local attorney seeking to defend Crow in the ongoing litigation by the injured girl's family, our ghost hunting photo guy, a park engineer named Tolman, and an actual cop that shows up named Harrison, the person who Mara has likely stolen the case file, gun, and ID off of before coming here. Oh, did I mention Mara is shady as fuck? Not a damn person believes she is a Fed, despite claiming to be 25 years old. She says odd things like being grossed out by an adult magazine, or saying she isn't allowed to smoke when she inspects cigarette machines around the park. Not exactly an adult response, even if you don't like those things. As Mara explores the park, the situation gets worse. More guests in worse and worse condition will populate the map, and the weather will change from stable to foggy to downpour to eerily quiet near the end. But thankfully, ammo for the 4 guns you will find along the way is plentiful, as are the healing items, such as med packs and antidotes for poison. You will even find upgrades for the guns, which, how small the park is and how short the length of the game is, may feel like an embarrassment of riches, and it kind of is. Anyway, it turns out that most everyone in the park has been attacked and are in turn infected by whatever pathogen the guests carry, as it is hinted that the original victim, Elaine, is still hospitalized by whatever the guests carry, and it seems to be a bacteria that is resistant to all known medications. And always, this gold mine scam is part of the plot. But to get to the bottom of that mystery, I need to put up a spoiler wall from here, so be warned. Longtime listeners know how I feel about spoilers and how folk worried about them should be slowly dipped testicles first into vats of boiling tar, but this is the world we live in now. So, all spoiler ready? Anyone even still here? They'll be back. Anyway, yeah. Where is all this gold coming from? Georgia isn't exactly known for its gold mines. And it's not. The gold was something Edward Crowe discovered decades earlier on a camping trip with his own father, when they discovered a weird metallic weed that had been whipping around on its own in the forest. Crowe's dad cut the weed and discovered it was an outer copper shell that was full of 24 karat solid gold. Realizing they were suddenly incredibly rich, the senior Crow bought the land around the weed and swore Edward to secrecy. And he even turned the land into a theme park he let Ed name. Edward took over the theme park when he was old enough and used it as a cover to dig deeper into the earth to uncover where this gold-filled weed was. Deep underground and decades of digging later, Edward uncovered a poisonous pool that the tendrils were growing from, and that there were several of the things around the pool. Edward, Tolman, and Marvin were the conspiracy who kept cutting the gold stocks down and shipping the gold overseas while collecting on the riches. But 2 years before the game begins, something has changed. The first guest arrived, crawling out of the pool. Edward began to study it in earnest using his science degree, only to discover a terrible secret. The pool is a gateway to a time somewhere in Earth's future, and the gold rods were tuners, like an old TV antenna. But anything sent through never returned. As the team did even more damage to the gold rods, the guests came in more droves, more twisted and mutated than before. The pool offered a glimpse into a future Earth where an apocalypse had occurred, a global pandemic that had rendered humanity moot. Sounds familiar somehow. Anyway, Crow was actually the first victim of one of these guests, and the first infected, which is why he went into hiding. Elaine was actually the second victim, haplessly wandering into a restricted area where one of the guests was in a holding cell. After speaking of Elaine, here is the second twist of the game, if you want to call it that. Mara, it is revealed at last, is Elaine, the girl from the accident a few years earlier. With no cure in sight and her own death impending, she has left the hospital, dyed her hair, and stole information off of an Officer Harrison to come back to Crow Country to get answers. She knows the guests are dangerous, but what she learns is that the guests are not really violent monsters, but obviously sick and scared people out of time and out of sync with the world they find themselves in who are more flailing around and trying to communicate rather than trying to rend and tear. Yet unfortunately, that's what they do, and spread their infection. Putting them down is more of a mercy killing than a need for defense. But Crow was seeking a cure in his solitude, and may have found it. By the end of the game, only 2 people are really dead, one deservedly so and one not, but I'll let you find out who. Mara/Elaine has traveled to the poison pool below the park with her arsenal and tools to confront Crow, who is by now very mutated out of control and barely resembles a human anymore. But he was able to create enough cures to heal Mara and several other infected in the park. Crow himself will not be taking the cure. Instead, he plans to enter the pool, and should he return, Mara is to kill him. He feels it is only fitting, as it was his greed and carelessness that caused her pain and suffering. He enters the pool, seeking to find out what Earth of the future is like, and returns within seconds wildly out of control, a giant hell beast that Mara must put down before he can leave the pool and ruin everything. Cure in hand and survivors aplenty, Mara dishes out the cure and some parting wisdom, and a worry of what this possible apocalyptic future date may hold, that 2106, and what pathogen may be awaiting all of us to end humanity as we know it. And that's the end of Crow Country proper. Crow Country is overall a short game, coming in about 6 to 8 hours, but not a damn bit of it is wasted time. There is nothing spare or frivolous, and it is jam-packed as far as an experience goes. For a game that's about $20, goddamn did I get my money's worth for the game length. However, for a survival horror game, I don't think it's as scary as it could have been. I did jump a few times due to simple scares, and the mood was overall foreboding. But the sprites keep it from being terrifying, and the abundance of ordnance kept me feeling pretty safe. However, that is a trade-off, as most things Mara interacts with, from getting healing items to uncovering traps, costs a bullet, but thankfully she can dodge the guests pretty well. But an area left populated only becomes more populated over time, so you will want to choose your fights carefully. But as I said, Mara has a great selection of survival horror classics: pistol, shotgun, magnum handgun, and flamethrower, each upgraded with laser sights and a magic wish granting little mushroom man who will find you out if you seek enough secrets. Weird, I know, but with the surrealism of this title already, why wouldn't wish granting mushroom men boys upgrade the strength of your 44 Magnum to war crime levels? There are even grenades to find freely, so why not? Aiming controls are perhaps the hardest part of the game, and the biggest challenge. Mara stands stock still while aiming before she shoots. No matter which way you face, she will aim her arm around her like a purple-haired Annie Oakley, trying to make trick shots. But this can lead to a lot of missed shots or awkward angles. This can also lead to her getting attacked easily, as Mara, like Silent Hill before her, does more damage the closer the enemy gets. She's no soldier or firearms expert as she claims to be. So we really are back in the PS1 survival horror days. So far, critics of Crow Country have been giving it generally favorable reviews. A lot of 7 to 9 out of 10s, which is roughly the thought of the day in games, I believe. The biggest problem, so far anyway, seems to be the implementation and obscurity of some of the puzzles, or how they are handled. In particular, I had a beef with the mushroom puzzle, which is solved by brute forcing your way through it and tanking damage and wasting health supplies, which, depending on how you've played, may be low. It was the kind of puzzle I had to have my phone on hand to solve, with the developers were asking of me. The second issue was the train puzzle, which, while not as obtuse, was badly worded and unclear as to what the goal was, in my opinion. Other reviewers thought the combat was too simple or not memorable, but I could level that argument at a lot of award-winning survival horror titles many of these same reviewers probably reviewed and fell all over themselves about, mainly because the developer was not a small British company, but were instead a Capcom or an old Konami type game, back when they made games. So I think this is another one of those critic points of contention where it was a them problem, not a game problem. But they just needed to fill word count on a document before turning it into their editors on a busy Friday before they all went off to get drunk. But how do I, the person talking right now, feel about Crow Country? Overall, Crow Country was well worth it. Short, to the point, good price point for now anyway. It is not only wearing its influences on its sleeve, it stole the fucking shirt right off the originators' backs to wear, much like what the main character did. It is the critical darling of the moment, and it does deserve the praise. But I feel this will likely be forgotten in about a year, which is too bad. 20 years from now, some asshole on whatever the fuck social media evolves into will be posting "Who remembers Crow Country?" engagement meme farming memes just to get 100 likes for the entertainment of the algorithm. I'm not mad I played this, but I'm not overly impressed either. It was oddly charming and cute, though its graphics and presentation, however, as if Tim Burton did a stop-motion Silent Hill movie. And the theme park is, as a site of horror, isn't something we see too often in games. The final battle is pretty good and quite fun, but also pretty easy if you are an old hand of survival horror games and know how to dodge enemies and save your ammo, especially for your most powerful guns, which is what happened to me, and I had a ton of hard-hitting shots for both the Magnum and shotgun by the end, which made quick work of the final boss. The real enemy of that fight is the aiming controls, which I was not a fan of, but it is what the developers went with and does harken back to PS1 games like the first Resident Evil, where you could run, aim, or shoot, but not all at once, and in some cases you only got to choose between aiming and shooting. Great for a demake title, but we've moved beyond that time period in 2024 in other games. The plot stumbled quite a bit with the gold going to Brazil angle. If they had left that out or done something different, it might have worked better. But it makes about as much sense as anything else you'd find in a straight-to-video horror movie title, so there is that excuse. I also don't see a whole lot of replay value in it. Unless you want to wait a few years and revisit it when I want a short game to play, which is its brevity being its greatest strength. Overall, grab it if you like and want to experience, but perhaps a sale might be a better time to do so, when it's more like $15 instead of $20. I don't see the sale price being too deep on this one for a while yet. I will say this in parting, however. Crow Country is homegrown horror done right, or at very least, very well done. It's not fancy, pretentious, loaded with unnecessary angles, and sticks to what it knows, even if the premise is very preposterous. But then again, so were those early survival horror titles. What with their megacorporation made viruses and dying wives who didn't want to fuck to feel guilty over, or very Japanese haunted houses and folklore. Crow Country's strengths are much greater than its weaknesses, and with some tweaking and added experience, I think the developers can make one hell of a sequel to this title, should they choose to. And don't let me being not as impressed as others bother you. Try this out. You see, I remember 1992, as it happened, and that was a long time ago for me. A lot has happened since then, and haunted theme parks just don't compare to real life. But at least they are fun distractions. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Mass Llama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves Podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.